Welcome to the CAS anthology analysis of Seamus Heaney's Harvest Bow for those studying AS 1900s to present poetry for the Heaney and Frost. Okay, so we've got Harvest Bow. See themes that this could possibly cover would be focus on family and tradition or rural life. Contextual information that you need to know. The older male figure in the poem is clearly Heaney's father, Patrick Heaney. Heaney's familiarity with the process in the poem stems from the fact that he would have seen these bows be made each autumn, reinforcing the fact that obviously it's about family or rural tradition. In Heaney's 1996 interview, which is worth a watch, Heaney spoke of his father's majesty and his father's having the country farmer's silence and hauteur. So if you imagine hauteur being this kind of reserved, very unlikely to actually talk typical farmer, okay? Harvest Bow is a knot woven from wheat straw, and it is typically a symbol of a fruitful harvest. This is an elegiac poem remembering his father. So as we open the poem, we've got the personal pronoun and the direct address to his father Patrick with you, as you plaited the harvest bow. You can see that the harvest bow is a symbol not only for the gathered harvest, but for the father's hidden self. So this taciturn father, who doesn't often reveal much about himself, imbues creating the harvest bow with all of this emotion that isn't often revealed. And Heaney sees that and sees the love that he puts into the bow. Then if we look at the choice of words implicated and mellowed silence. So implicated suggests that he's putting a bit of himself into the act of making the bow. Mellowed silence, to let something mellow, suggests that the father is aging. He's also incredibly laid back, okay? He is gentler and more easygoing, tempered by maturity and experience. And then we've got wheat that does not rust. Now, obviously, wheat does not rust, but it's representative of the feelings or connection between father and son, a sense that these feelings, these emotions have longevity and life. You've got the alliteration of but brightens, which is really interesting. Heaney is a massive fan of oral imagery and uses alliteration heavily throughout most of his poetry. The line is given, teamed with the line above, given a charged energy by the multiple sound effects, making something magical. Brightens as it tightens, twist by twist. So you've got brightens and tightens, the internal rhyme there, and then you've also got more alliteration, tightens, twist, twist. And if you want to be really pernickety, you've actually got the consonants, because you've got the repeated T sounds throughout. So you've got but, brightens, it, tightens, twist, twist, okay? So alliteration, repetition, consonants, internal rhyme, and this further strengthens the bond and suggests something magical through the creation of oral imagery. Knowable corona. A corona is a circle of light. So we can see that this imbues this with a really warm memory of his father. And it gives the bow a kind of perfection and beauty, a kind of almost ethereal beauty. You can see that this is something familiar to Heaney through the word choice there, knowable. Again, reinforcing the fact that this is a childhood experience that happened every year. It was ritualistic. Then if we look at throwaway, love not of straw. Throwaway reminds us that because of the season, and the fact that it was made every single autumn, it would have been discarded after there had been actually a fruitful harvest. But as we see later on in the poem, Heaney actually keeps it, even though it's meant to be something disposable. Love knot of straw, obviously it's not really a love knot. This is metaphorically referring to the expression of the father's unspoken love for his son, tradition, and the land. And it is communicated on a level beyond the verbal. So whilst the father is taciturn, he displays this kind of silent hauteur, in Heaney's own words, we can see that he does express it through the creation of making the bow. And if you team that with the idea of the noble corona and the imagery of light, you can see that metaphorically the bow illuminates Heaney's father for him and gives him an insight into expressing a gentle artistic side to himself. Then if you look at stanza 2, hands that aged round ash plants and cane sticks. So you've got alliteration, which highlights the father's skill, aged round ash plants. So these are hands that repeatedly made the bow year after year after year, highlighting the skill of his father's rural work or task. He is not just capable of making something delicate in an intricate process, it's more than that, because he's so familiar with it that it's more than capability. There's a sense of finesse to his skill. There's enjambment throughout each stanza and between stanzas, which creates a sense of gentle movement in keeping with the idea of weaving the stanza into a delicate shape, just as the father weaves the straw or the wheat into a delicate shape of the bow. Then if we look at the "and lapped the spurs on a lifetime of gamecocks," you've got the repetition of "and" from the first stanza, or from the first line of that stanza, and then again on the second line of that stanza. So the repetition and again the verb choice "lapped" is really interesting, because the choice of diction here suggests a multiplicity to his father. Despite being accustomed to rough activity, he can also be really delicate with his movements as well, which is really interesting because it paints a really positive portrayal of Heaney's father, and we can hear the sense of pride. Then if we have "harked to their gift and worked with fine intent," you've got really interesting use of alliteration again, with "to their" and "worked with." The alliteration reinforces just how delicate and intricate the father can be, and the adjective choice "fine" is also reinforcing that for us, this sense of delicacy. The movements of the father's hands are careful and concentrated. Then you've got this beautiful choice of the word somnambulant. So if you think of like to sleepwalk, and this suggests for us, especially teamed with the caesura, that Heaney's father could move instinctively, as if moving in sleep, and it's imbued with a tone of awe. Heaney is amazed at his father's creation or his father's creative process, and that's furthered through the choice of simile, "finger it like braille." So you can imagine this young Heaney being so fascinated that he's touching his father's work as if it is actually braille. Okay, that's how fascinated he is. Like braille, we think of reading, and we get this idea that through the simile, Heaney is reading into his father's actions, that the bow acts as a physical manifestation of his father's feelings. We can also see that Heaney regards the harvest bow as a key to the memories of the time he and his father spent together. Gleaning the unsaid, so to glean, to really understand, to gain knowledge, and the unsaid, so the idea of braille and the idea of unsaid again suggests that Heaney is in fact reading into his father's actions, especially because his father is a man of few words. We can see that the absence of dialogue further reinforces this, and everything of importance is conveyed through the act of making the bow. He is able to perceive his father's emotions or feelings and love for him through the bow. Palpable is again really interesting because that suggests that it's something readily or plainly seen. Then if we look at the childish language of the next stanza, we've got "I spy," evoking for obviously us the sense of the childhood game. And again, to spy, so it's not something that's heard, it's something that is witnessed through this act. His love is plainly seen. And then we've got the really beautiful use of assonance with the repeated O sounds throughout that as well. I see us walk between the railway slopes. You have more assonance this time with double E sounds. And you've also got that reference to sight again, see us walk. The railway slopes, we can see that this memory triggers a return to his childhood experiences. It becomes a gateway into another memory, the making of the bow, and that memory becomes a gateway into other memories. Then if we look at the evening of the long grass and the midges, we can see that he mixes beautiful images with less pleasurable ones. So long grass suggests really idyllic countryscape, and then the midges something slightly less pleasant. Okay, so you've got your juxtaposition there. And it also emphasises for us a vivid depiction of childhood memories. That there's a sense of realism because of the mixture of pleasant and unpleasant. Then you've got the sibilant smoke straight up. And the sibilant evokes the sound of walking through the grass with his father. You can almost hear the swishing sound echoed there. And again, that's shown through beds and ploughs in hedges. You've sibilant sounds the whole way throughout. It's really interesting because you've got several different types of structural separation of pronouns. You've got the I at the start, and then you've got the you with the harvest bow in your lapel. So you've got it at the start of this stanza and at the end, but then you also have it over two different stanzas. This one ends with you and the next one starts with me. So it happens several times, and I think really what he's trying to show here is the disconnection between father and son, in that they both find it difficult to express their feelings verbally to each other. And maybe that is again emphasised through the alliteration that makes for this really vivid memory of an auction and on outhouse in that penultimate line of that stanza there. You've also got the use of caesura, and I think this really emphasises for us Heaney's warm memories of the time spent with his father, and there's a sense of shifting in memory when we swap between the different tenses here. You'll notice that we've got the past tense at the very start, as you platted, implicated, and then we move to I see us, and that present tense, which emphasises how vivid the memory was and how poignant and important it was for Heaney, obviously. So as previously shown, we've got loads of enjambment. This time, though, I think the enjambment kind of feeds into the structural separation of these two pronouns, the you and the me. We are reminded that these times are in the past, far in the past, because of enjambment, that he is looking back in a nostalgic way, but we're also reminded that Heaney would have been going to boarding school in the autumn, and that he is upset that his time at home was coming to an end. We can see that when the past is described in the poem, it's always described in the present tense to give it a sense of immediacy and emphasising how vivid the memories are for Heaney. You've got this really beautiful reference to the big lift as well, which is obviously referring to the childhood concept of having your father lift you up onto their shoulders and bring you around. And then we've got the reference to the stick, which is obviously a walking stick. Again, really simple, childlike language. Then there's the alliteration of whacking, weeds, and the tips. This is interesting because I think the alliteration here evokes the energy of the father, and it's juxtaposed with the earlier, more gentle task of the making of the bow, reflecting that there are two sides to Heaney's father, practical farmer and gentle man who couldn't put his emotions into words, reflected in the absence of dialogue in the poem. Emotion is represented through the symbol of the bow. Then you've got also the repetition of beats. So beats, out of time, beats, and then but. So you've got alliteration as well as repetition, and then you've got flushes. Okay, and you've got the rhyming couplet there too. This suggests through the verb choice that he flushes nothing out of the bushes, and it acts as a metaphor for their difficulties in expressing their feelings. Obviously, flushing nothing out of the bushes, you're whacking a bush as you go along, maybe a wild rabbit in the countryside would run out, but this is not the case, reinforcing the fact that they both cannot communicate that love, but it's felt even though it's not verbally expressed. Then you've got the nothing and the caesura there at the end of nothing. And the caesura reinforces the lack of verbal interaction in the poem. Then if you look at the idea of the original town lad and the fact that he presents this image, it evokes a sense of community, who also participate in the autumn tradition every single year of, creating the bow to suggest that there will be, or hope for, a fruitful harvest. Then you've got still tongue-tied, and you've got the TT sounds in the straw tied by your hand. So you've got alliteration throughout. Suggests that the alliteration comes from a place where they don't express their emotions in a conventional way, and the alliteration and the sibilant sounds there as well of still and straw make it into a tongue twister to express Heaney's contrast to his father's inability to express himself. Heaney doesn't share this inability to express himself, where Heaney's father twists straw and his emotions or love into a bow. Heaney plats memories and emotions into a poem, expressing himself through the medium of words. So unlike the father, he isn't taciturn, he isn't reserved, he's a poet, and his craft, his very bread and butter is words. Then if you look at the final stanza, you've got this lovely, the end of art is peace. So this is reflected in the purpose or the exhibition of love witnessed in the father's bow and in Heaney's poem, but you can see that the end or the ultimate aim of art is to create a feeling of love or peace in us, and that's what both learning about Heaney's father's bow does for us and also what reading Heaney's poem does for us too. You've got, could be the motto of this frail device. So frail suggests fragility. The adjective choice there suggests that this is something easily destroyed and therefore all the more precious. Verb choice pinned up on our deal dresser, obviously just being, your dresser, emphasises his obvious affection for his father, and his admiration of his father's work. Something so fragile that wasn't really meant to last the summer is, we can see now pinned up, taking pride of place, and the alliteration of deal dresser really reinforces that for us. Drawn snare and the simile used here is really interesting because obviously we think of snare, we think of rural countryside, and we know that a snare is a loop of wire to trap small animals. So the corn seems to be trapped, but the spirit slips away. And really this suggests that even though the father is gone, the echo of his spirit and the love remains in the object, the bow that he has made. And this is reinforced through the sibilant slipped lately by the spirit of corn. And the sibilant sounds there. Then, final line, we've got, yet burnished by its passage and still warm. Still warm is something really poignant because we can see that Heaney trusts that it's going to bring about the memory of his father, and that by keeping the bow, it brings him comfort every time he looks at it. The poet's father might be gone, but an echo of his spirit and his love will always remain in the harvest bow. The bow, we can see, becomes a talisman with magical powers, supporting a continuity of good fortune. Heaney has mimicked the actions of his father, but with words through his poetry rather than through actions. He has plaited together remembered moments and emotions, and the result is this feeling of deep happiness. Structure, we have 5 6-line stanzas. If you try to examine the rhyme scheme, you can see that there's some couplets, there's some half rhymes throughout, but there's complete rhyme in stanza 4. The longer lines and rhyme scheme mirror the intricacies in the making of the harvest bow itself, so the structure is meant to mimic just how difficult and delicate the making of this bow is, and just how incredibly impressive and admirable it is that so much love and effort has gone into it then. The tone in places could be said to be warm, sorrowful, mournful, and rejoicing as well. Sorrowful and mournful because the father is no longer there, but rejoicing in how much of a wonderful and impressive man he was, and really warm, obvious affection, sense of pride for Heaney's father as well. Just to finish on that point, please remember that all of the content of these videos are only meant to be a starting point for you. There's tons of other fantastic resources out there that will help consolidate your knowledge, and this should only be a springboard for that.